Good afternoon, Dennis. I'm so happy to see you because, well, we had to miss, unfortunately, quite a few prearranged meetings due to abrupt, random, and unexpected power outages, which, like a domino effect, cause no internet, no electricity. I'm really sorry for the suffering of Ukraine, but let's proceed by our long planned program. So we're discussing the current situation, and of course, uh, I guess you had the chance to appreciate our president's visit to the U.S., the meeting with President Biden, and of course, a very impactful, bright address to American Congress. Both houses of their parliament met, and I would say it was a success. It was an ovation, and there was also some tangible outcome. I heard that the Patriot air defense system are finally coming, as you have begged at the very beginning of invasion in your passionate video. However, before those systems can protect Ukraine, there is a long time required. Even the training for the military will take at least 6 weeks, and also they have to arrive first. And while this is happening, I'm not sure what's the weather in Odessa today because here in Riga we were neck deep in snow, continuous minus 10 degrees Celsius at night. And while we're speaking, I know that Russian strikes are continuously devastating Ukrainian power and the heating supply. So, how are you today?
Well, it seems to be a very simple question, but this simple question is a part of a bigger question. Uh, first of all, talking about what you've mentioned about our president, frankly speaking, I was not the guy who voted for him because I had no idea if an actor can become a president. But it appears that an actor can become a hell of a president when the local apocalypse comes. Secondly, about this visit, the preamble of this visit was the other visit because our president, all out of a sudden, appeared on a front line of a battle in a place which is called Bakhmut. And this place is actually the hottest spot of the Ukrainian front at the moment, where people are dying by hundreds, if not by thousands. So, all out of a sudden, instead of sitting in Kiev, where it is relevantly warm and cozy, he came to Bakhmut. And immediately after that, he went to the United States, where you're absolutely right. The Congress gave him a hell of an ovation for 10 minutes, a stand up applause. And yes, he had received all the support, all the financial support, all the military support, including the protective system, which is called Patriot. So, of course, experts say that it takes about 6 months for any soldier to become a relevantly good specialist in terms of operating Patriot. But then what do you know? Maybe our soldiers have already been training. We never know. And we wouldn't be discussing
Maybe,
that
by the
because
way, that there was negotiations by Ukrainian general staff to purchase those Patriot air defense systems back around 2018-19. However, one piece costs $1 billion, and I believe there was no budget back then.
absolutely, absolutely. Same refers to the aircraft system, which was discussed back in 2019. Even in 2018, we were discussing to buy a couple of military aircrafts from the United States of America, but that discussion was purely theoretic because the price of those aircrafts was beyond the Ukrainian budget. And the Patriot is a beautiful system, of course, but one Patriot will not cover the sky, and one patriot will definitely not save us from what is coming from Russia. What may save us, apart from the will of God, is the will of Ukrainians. As you know, Mr. Zelensky was pronounced to be a man of the year, but only as a part of the Ukrainian nation, which he represents, which is actually a unique case because usually on the front page of Time Journal, a person is placed. But in our case, it's not only a person, but a symbol of the whole nation. Uh, you've mentioned that Russian shellings of Ukrainian energy system were unexpected. I would disagree with you. They are absolutely expected. We know that they're doing all they can. They're sending the remains of their rockets because they don't have many. They're actually manufacturing about 50 to 60 rockets per week. And all these rockets go to Ukraine. And all these rockets are aimed on power stations, on transformators, things like that. For the time being, they are sparing the gas system, which, but it will come. It will come. Absolutely, I'm absolutely sure that it will come in time. Um, the initial goal of Mr. Putin was to make Ukrainian people beg for mercy and throw themselves in the warm embrace of Russia. But actually, he had reached a different outcome. Coming back to Odessa, how are things in Odessa? Uh, well, first of all, about weather. Lucky we are, with a bit of help of God, we are not suffering from severe weather for the time being. It will come soon. But of course, taking into consideration the fact that 85% of the city is powerless 22 to 23 hours per day, which technically means that people do not have a possibility to heat themselves, to cook food on the electric stoves. The conditions in which we are living now are rather frustrating. And at the same time, answering your simple question, I'm not only good, I feel myself wonderful. I feel myself absolutely motivated. And I think that we have to thank Putin for this motivation because really all he is doing, he is building a nation of Ukrainians. And it is well known that any nation is being built, unfortunately, in blood. So that's what he is doing. He is building our nation in blood. And there is no possibility he can win this war because he's not fighting with just a bunch of people covering some territory. He's fighting with very motivating, very loving their country people. And these people will not stop. These people will never beg. They will not kneel. They will not pray for electricity. They will not pray for heating devices from Russia or any favors from Russia. You know, we have a saying here uh, better to live in darkness than with you, meaning better to live in darkness than with Russians. That's how it is. But if you're interested, I will tell you more in detail. So ask questions and I will gladly answer them.
Mm, First of all, let me wish everyone in Ukraine to have your level of stamina and your level of bravery. I believe there is a saying in the US that the tree of liberty is watered by blood of heroes. And just, I remember that you are a prominent movie reviewer, and of course, you heard about this new Will Smith movie about the Buffalo Soldier. So you might compare this movie's hero
Mm-hmm.
behavior, which is actually based on a real history, to the behavior of the slave owners. The same time when our president was visiting the front line, where an actual battle is raging, and as he mentioned during his speech, some trenches, like World War style, are changing allegiance, a few times per day. In the middle of this bloody battle, Ukrainians are getting stronger. while the Russian appointed ex-space agency head Rogozin, he went to occupy territory and got wounded in a drunken brawl. So, mm,
In the
uh,
butt, actually. He got wounded
yeah,
in his ass.
but I believe the other Russian hero, the starter of all this calamity, Strelkov, wasn't he also wounded in the butt? But maybe I'm confusing something.
No, no,
Like when somebody's
I
running
think it was a
away,
different. No, that was a different guy, not
and
Strelkov. But it
yeah,
doesn't
but
really
you see,
matter.
when somebody's running away, as I think you're also an avid shooter, I guess if the butt is the biggest part of their body, that's natural target. So yeah, I'd love to discuss that longer, but yes, I'm concerned about Odessa and how the life is going on there, because what they say here in Europe. Well, there are legitimate concerns, for example, by mothers who have children, especially small infants, who need their milk heated, or the smaller children that are more prone for disease because you're an adult. You're a formidable man who is going into sports, as I mentioned, shouldn't practice, I believe, also, even the basics of medicine. But what are the plain folks doing? What is the life without power? How people are moving around, how is it possible to buy stuff in the supermarket when there is no light? How is it possible to get there? What is the road traffic? How
Let's go step by step, my friend, because in any other case we'll get mixed up. First of all, a couple of days ago, I've watched a movie dedicated to St. Petersburg during World War II. As you know, it was completely, well,
That's a
partially destroyed.
horrible war crime by Stalin, by the way. I consulted
Absolutely.
military, and this deserves also really detailed discussion later. But go on, please.
Yeah. Because the funny thing about this horrible atrocity is that Soviet Union tried to blame German troops for blocking Leningrad, as it used to be called, and causing a horrible hunger and horrible situation within the population of the city. But in reality, Soviet Union was responsible for this situation. And anyway, in this movie, what I saw was a city full of people that survived 2 winters, 2 horrible winters, without electricity, without any sanitary appliances, without heating, and without food. People who lived on their belts, literally eating their belts. And belts is the most innocent thing that they've been consuming because some of them had to consume their own children to feed other children, and still the nation survived. So in comparison with what happened in St. Petersburg, what's happening in Odessa now is child's play. But then, of course, people in 1941 and 1942 technically, physically, and mentally were stronger than people of the 21st century, which are used to all sorts of cozy things. And when these cozy things are being taken away from you, it appears that you miss them a lot. And you may mix the feelings of missing those unnecessary things with the feeling of loss. Some things you can live without, some things you cannot. So let's go step by step. Of course, critical infrastructure had survived, and it will survive regardless whatever happens, because we have plenty of generators that would be powering all the hospitals, all the major stores, all the administrative buildings. Um, so if the hook comes to the crook, the hospitals, the clinics, the maternity wards, etc., those will survive. About the
So there is
supervisor.
a power supply
No,
because
no,
I'm thinking, the people on the
even without power supply because they've got generators.
generators, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So while we're and that actually refers not only to bigger places and administrative places, that also refers to small businesses, no matter how weird it sounds. But we'll come back to that. In terms of grocery stores, with grocery stores, it's kind of weird because once again, we got used to those big supermarkets where you can buy everything. And when the big supermarket is left without power, it becomes a very dark and very unpleasant place.
Cold,
Uh,
I'm afraid.
Definitely, because winter is surrounding us. So some of them, about 50% of them, have got themselves big generators, which means that they're actually losing money hand over fist because a day of running such a generator may cost up to 10 grands, even more. Uh, a huge number. I mean, some of them, instead of getting generators, got themselves a new habit. So whenever there is a blackout, you have a huge supermarket which is completely blacked out, and there is a guard standing in front of it. And if you want to walk inside, the guard will walk you through the shelves. So he will actually escort every visitor, which means that there are supermarkets, I mean, big supermarkets, where there is only one visitor escorted by guard through the dark corridors. Uh,
Hey, it used to be like this during the COVID times here, by the way.
oh, I didn't know that. But none of them, the bigger ones, none of them closed. Talking about small stores, about 50 to 60% of them unfortunately had to close because they don't have enough potential, I mean financial potential to power themselves with generators. And talking about generators, a 5 kilowatt generator before the war would cost you around $500 square price. Now the price of such a generator is 2/2.5 thousand dollars, up to $2,500. And that is not the major problem. The major problem is that it is really hard to buy one because they like they disappear the moment they appear. And if you want to buy a generator, what you have to do, you have to go to one of those internet stores and order it and wait for a week or two or maybe 3 weeks. And then there is another way of doing it. You can request one from one of the European stores supporting Ukraine, but in such case, there is no guarantee you will receive a new one, not a refurnished one, not a second-hand one, and still you will have to wait for another 2 or 3 weeks. But
Hey, I
still,
wanted to mention that, my friends who are in kind of construction, repairs, they would complain that if they would go to market, for example, construction market in Odessa, and they try to purchase a generator or, for example, a gas heater, for food cooking or for heating the apartment. There are no more certifications. There are no more warranties, and this is actually very risky. I sure hope nobody has suffered because of those counterfeit or just retrofit devices.
you are absolutely right, and yet, well, you're wrong and you're right at the same time, because officially you can purchase a generator in one of big construction stores. But when you go to and then you will have a warranty and everything, just like in good old pre-war times. But when you go to one of these construction stores, they would just they would just smile and tell you that they're out of generators for the last month or so and they cannot help you in any way. So what you have to do, you have to go to one of the street markets where you can buy a generator, but of course there would be no warranty and no nothing, which technically means that you can take it home and it appears that it's broken, it's out of order. Another bad thing about them is that generators are not only being bought by small businesses. Generators are not only being bought by vendors, they're also being bought by simple folks, and now pay attention, not only those who live in the private houses and cottages, etc., but by those who live in high-rise
Exactly.
buildings.
That was the concern by construction educated people. Ventilation is required, distance from walls, distance from where people sleep, so there
All
is
sorts
fan
of
warmth.
things. But what people do, they buy themselves a 3 watt, 3 kilowatt generator, sorry, which is more than enough to power a relevantly big apartment. They take it up to the 20th store or to the 30th store and install it on their balcony, and which technically creates a huge problem not only for their neighbors, because their neighbors do the same thing. But it creates a huge danger of these folks, A, dying from fumes. Yeah, it seems that the generator stands on the balcony and there is fresh air outside, but then you have to learn to understand basics of physics, and then you will see that fumes have a tendency to go back to the apartment for some reason, depending upon the airflow, etc., and different nuances. Apart from fumes, people are not used of managing such an equipment. It's not like buying a radio or or a mobile phone. Even mobile phones explode. That's what I heard, at least. Uh, but a generator is a piece of an equipment which needs certain understanding, and it requires constant maintenance. It
It's like a
requires.
car engine, basically. Just
It
slow
is.
it.
It is. It requires attention. It requires adequate fuel and adequate oil. Uh, And people just think that after buying a generator and installing it and hooking it up to their internal electric system of the apartment, life will become peachy. Instead, the generator explodes, taking care of half of the apartment and of whoever is within this half. We have plenty of very unfortunate cases when people get wounded and killed by misuse of generators. And you have also mentioned another thing. You mentioned gas stoves, those portable gas stoves. The problem
Yeah,
is that in high-rise buildings, it is prohibited to install gas equipment. So whoever lives in a high-rise has to use an electric stove to cook. And of course,
yeah.
without
My family, we could not obtain a permission, though we live on the third floor of the historical building. The one on Pergoskaya Street was like this
yeah,
halls.
mhm.
Not legal.
Yeah, it is. It is illegal. So before war, it was not a problem. And actually, more and more Odessa guys, Odessa dwellers, preferred electric system in terms of electrifying their
Yes,
houses
of course we did.
and not using gas at all. For example, take my house. I don't have gas here, even though I could install it, but I don't have it because I never thought that I would ever need it. Which means that everything that I have here is powered by electricity, boilers, stoves, cattle, etc., etc., etc. Okay, but then war came, and then Russians started to destroy our energy system, and we are under constant threat of this system dying for good. So all these high-rise buildings are being cut off electricity. People have to walk their way up to the 30th floor, and that is not the easiest thing to do, believe me. And more to say, they are deprived of a very of basic things such as hot water, such as hot tea. They cannot even boil their kettle because their kettle is electrical as well. And of course, they cannot cook food. Uh, so what people start doing, they start buying portable gas stoves. And those portable gas stoves, of course, they're also not licensed. Of course, there is no warranty, and they're sold everywhere now. You can buy them in a grocery store, you can buy them on the corner of your street, you can buy them in the market, anywhere you want. They're all made in China. Their quality is extremely poor, their price is extremely high. Before war, you could buy one for $20. Now $150 is not is the bottom price actually.
That's a ripoff. That's the real marauders, the
Yes,
people who are speculating and making super profits on that. But that's kind of Soviet times are back in a way because that's how people used to live with Mother Russia, and that's, I guess, exactly what we were trying to escape building, Ukraine for 30 years.
it is a very good picture for those who have a a desire to rejoin good old Russian world. This is what Russian world brings to any country it invades: poverty and corruption, nothing else. Coming back to those gas stoves, uh, what the construction is basic. The gas stove itself, the portable gas stove, is connected to a small gas balloon, like 200 milliliters or something like that. And by igniting it, cheers, you have a possibility to cook simple things and to boil simple things, like a couple of eggs. But instead of doing it, people who have, well, first of all, those portable gas stoves are not designed to be used indoors. And even on those made in China, it clearly says not for use indoors due to several reasons. First of all, gas leaks.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, lethally dangerous.
gas leaks. Secondly, secondly, a gas stove like that consumes a lot of air.
Yeah,
And third of all, it is absolutely prohibited to use such a poorly made product anywhere because their quality, like I said, is horrible. What happens is that people start using them not for boiling eggs, but for cooking dinner for a family of five, for example. Then they forget about a gas stove. Or they forget a gas tank on a stove, which is heated already. Or a gas tank starts leaking and they don't smell it and they try to ignite it. As a result, only during last week we had like three or maybe even four cases when those gas stoves exploded. And luckily, none, as far as I remember, none of nobody was killed, but people got hurt. And of course, well, one girl was put to a hospital with severe burns, but she survived, fortunately, because it appeared that people were not near their appliances when it happened. Lucky they are. But then, of course, there are other people who get, like I said, who get killed by generators, and then there are people who get killed by generators not even knowing that. A week ago, we had a case when a whole family, a mother, three children, they got killed in their sleep by fumes, and they didn't even feel it. As far as I remember, the generator was installed in the garage of their house, and the ventilation system took the fumes to the dormitory, and everybody died. And of course, it's horrible. But then I do understand people because they have to eat something, they have to drink something, they have to take care of their very simple basic needs. You mentioned children, and
Yeah,
yeah,
children can't even possibly understand that because I'm fortunate to have a science education. So, for example, I guarantee that those smaller gas appliances they will overheat if used, beyond their capacity. That's just a matter of time. But if somebody is not into engineering or natural sciences, they're not supposed to know this. Poor children.
well, young kids and teenagers, they've developed a certain psychological resistance to what's going on during these months. For example, let's take my son. He's 18 years old, which makes him an adult. the way I see it, because when I was 18, I was already working in Odessa State Administration. But he kind of put himself into the cocoon, and he tries to do his best to persuade himself and everybody who is around him that nothing bad is going on. It's not a blackout. It's a small shortage of power. It's not war. It will pass soon. The bombs will not destroy our house, and they will not destroy any house in the neighborhood. I remember when the war started. It was the first day, and at that was a horrible day. Actually, bombs were falling everywhere around the house, and the house was not shaking; it was dancing. Actually, it seemed that the house was jumping up and down like like a person listening to Snoop Doggy Dogg or Dr. Dre, you know. And
Bouncing.
yeah,
Ooh,
we woke
yeah.
up in terror, completely scared. But my son, he kept on sleeping, and when we woke him up, the first thing he said, "Oh no, no, these are not bombs," he said. "It's somebody having a birthday and shooting fireworks." A lot of time had passed since that moment, and he's still surrounding himself by a cocoon and trying to preserve the normal way of things. So whenever it gets really dark, and recently we had 7 days without electricity, it's hard, believe me. Psychologically, not even physiologically, but psychologically, it's hard to live in darkness. It was 7 days without electricity and 7 days without sun. The weather was really grim, so it was grim inside the house and grim outside. And that was the time when my son almost broke down, and I saw it in his eyes because his cocoon, his psychological defense was cracking. But when you're wandering around the streets of Odessa and you see the kids, just minding their own business, playing, doing things like that, it seems that all kids are like that, small and big. They are not only adapting, they are somehow protecting themselves from this morbid reality. Another thing is their parents, which are rather innovative. A couple of days ago, after another shelling, we had 2 or 3 days of blackout. And I went to one of those bigger grocery stores where they built inside a grocery store, they built a small place dedicated to allowing people to charge their appliances, do whatever they want. There was electricity there. The place was powered by a generator, and it was crowded with people just talking to each other, charging their mobile phones, chatting on internet because there was a Wi-Fi provided by Starlink. And there I saw one guy, a young fellow about 25 or 30 years old, who was actually making a mousse for a baby food. He was mixing some vegetables in a mixer, obviously, using the electricity of the grocery store. So talking about
Yeah, of kindness and of I would say community of the people, because this local grocery store, it's a symbol of life. If there is no life, there is no sales. It sounds cynical, but at the same time, it's eternal, I guess, as the children's playing in any nation under any circumstance. Do you remember this Italian movie about the father who went to concentration camp, Nazi death camp, because they were Jewish, with his little child, and just father gave a very simple instruction to the child: "This is a game, and your aim is to graduate." He never used the word alive, but that's exactly what happened.
yeah, yeah, and I believe that even without such instructions, kids of Odessa understand what's going on as a game. And they try to play this game, and sometimes they are better in terms of obeying the rules than grown ups. Because grown ups, they still think that they're in control of their lives, which unfortunately is not so. We're no longer in control of our lives. We don't have tomorrow for the time being. We have hopes for tomorrow. And we have understanding that the only way Ukraine as a country will prevail is by winning this war. Personally, I don't even doubt that we shall win this war because I am a very logical person. And I do understand that if we lose, there will be no longer Ukraine. There will be a certain southern territory occupied by Russia. And such occupation may last for 10 years, for 20 years, for 100 years, and eventually we shall deteriorate to a condition of any territory occupied by Russians. I mean, take Donbass, for example. Look at these guys. Of course, before war, I mean, before 2014, we sometimes used to play to to joke about Donbas people, calling them pro-Soviet, etc., etc., etc. But I remember Donetsk before 2014. It was a flourishing city. Donetsk used to be called a capital of roses because there were like a hundred of thousands of rose bushes in the city. It was a beautiful place, and now it's all grim and gray with gray people walking around. This is what they got.
Hey, have you been to this fully digital restaurant where all the menus were by touchscreen? That was year 2012
Nope,
in
nope.
Donetsk. Yeah, but on the other hand, well, this is recent events. If you think that Russia was ever different, think of Königsberg, which was occupied right after the war. By the way, the agreement was to actually let their people decide should they want to join back Germany, stay under Soviet occupation, or become independent. This deadline passed recently, but nothing happened. However, if we look at the city, that was the home of one of the most famous philosophers, Immanuel Kant, a city that was in poetry, philosophy, music, literature, even in mathematics, there was a famous problem called the Bridges of Königsberg. And look at it now. It's surrounded by European Union from every side. But it's basically a shithole, completely retarded as compared to the neighbors. All the shopping used to be done abroad by the people who live there. And that's not mentioning that even Putin's ex-wife is residing there because I guess she hates Russia, and even this pale ghost of Europe satisfies her better than her motherland. But yeah, that's really depressing. The Russian attitude to life, well, it's opposite from life. I would say it's hell and damnation, attitude.
And that is one of the reasons why they cannot win this war. Because when Putin only started shelling our energy system, the first thing that I understood is that his motives are understandable, but he seems not to understand the core of Ukrainian mentality. Ukrainians historically have no idea about standing on their knees. They've never stood on their knees. Ukrainians hardly can be called uh, bloodthirsty fighters. They've never started any wars by themselves unless being provoked. But it is really hard to stop a Ukrainian which is being slapped or spat at his face. And what Putin has done, he spat at our face. He tried to put us in the conditions when we would have no other alternative but to beg. Which, well, I'm saying that, and I feel myself funny. I'm starting to laugh because I I can hardly imagine. And being a writer, I have a vivid imagination, but I can hardly imagine that there is anything Putin can do that will make me beg for mercy. So, yes, a beautiful example of how people get united when the city is powerless is the grocery store, where there are plenty of people not buying things, but just sitting on the floor, charging their mobile phones, talking to each other. And believe me, Slav, they're laughing. Their faces are not pale and grim. They're not crying for mercy. They're not saying, oh, please, when this hell will stop. No, 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 no. They're laughing, they're exchanging rumors. Every now and then I hear not very pleasant words addressed to Russia and their president. And they seem to be alive, these people. Yes, they're making mistakes. Yes, they're using portable gas stoves and they get hurt from using those portable gas stoves. Yes, there are marauders that use the situation in their favor. For example, forget the gas stoves. Uh, Look into power banks, for example. A simple power bank that has a possibility to charge your mobile phone and that's it will cost you around maybe $10 before the war. Now the price of such power bank is 25, 30, and most of them are not very good. Then there are such things as, for those who have enough money, there are such appliances as EcoFlow, Blue Yeti, etc. Those are power, I would also call them power banks actually, because those are power stations with a capacity of 1 kilowatt, for example, or 1.5 kilowatt, or even 2 kilowatt. But what is 2 kilowatt in comparison with appliances that surround us? For example, the electric kettle would take 1.2 kilowatt when it starts, and your simple boiler would take 2 kilowatt all the time. In my house, I have two electric boilers. So uh, actually, I need one 2 kilowatt power station to power each of them. And these power stations, they they were perceived like toys before the war, and they were usually promoted and used by computer geeks with enough financial potential because their price was they were quite costly. But now their price went up in the sky. For example, a 2 kilowatt EcoFlow would cost you about $3,000, and these $3,000 are useless. I have a problem in my house. My cottage is heated by a boiler which consumes 1.2 kilowatts. And when blackouts started, I I had to use a generator, obviously, to keep the house warm. But I cannot use generator 24/7 because generator consumes about 2 slash 2.5 liters of gas per hour. That
And that's about
means,
half gallon just for our American
yeah,
listeners.
yeah, yeah. And a liter of gas would cost you a bit over $10. So we're talking about $20 per hour, $20 multiplied by 24. Geez, your budget goes way up in the sky. So I was trying to look for an alternative, and then I saw one of these EcoFlows for $3,000, and I thought, okay, it's $3,000, but then I'll buy it, and at least it will power up my boiler. But the engineer who is maintaining my boiler, he said, well, it will power up your boiler, no problem, but for 20 minutes, and that's it.
Oh,
Then the battery goes down, and the battery goes dead. Um, And yet, people buy these things. People buy these things, and these things explode just as well. Because what people do, they buy them and they try to install them directly in their electric system in their apartments. That's what it says in the instructions to EcoFlow, that you can just install it in your socket and it will power the apartment. But what people forget to do, they forget to turn off the external uh, power. And if,
So it goes into the common network.
yes, and if it comes back for some reason, then the device explodes, and whatever appliances are hooked to it will explode as well, or at least burn down. So people
Yeah,
use
so this
these.
means you need a circuit breaker, like in my country house, that
Yeah,
turns on and
you need
off
a circuit
external
breaker. You
power
need
supply.
a stabilizing system. But first of
Yeah,
all, you need a person who understands technologies and who understands that electricity is not a toy or a magic force which runs in our sockets, but something which may become really dangerous. And now, like I said, when over 80% of Odessa is black, and that, when I say black, people have to understand that it's black like in that good old song, black, black. It gets dark by 16:30 now, like something like that. Uh, so late afternoon, the city seems to be abandoned. When you're wandering around the city, you don't see a single light. All the windows are black. All the street lights are out. The road lights are out as well, which means the traffic is uncontrolled. Well, okay, some streets are controlled by cops, by transport police, but then most of the streets are absolutely uncontrollable. And in any good old movie dedicated to the end of the world, uh, such an uncontrollable traffic would be shown as cars bumping into each other and exploding, etc. But in Odessa, for some strange reason, and
yeah,
Odessa
Roland
is,
Emmerich style. Yeah.
yeah, Roland Emmerich style. But you have to understand that Odessa is well known for reckless driving. People in Odessa are not as crazy as people of Naples, for example, of Naples, but they are rather rude and inadequate in terms of driving their cars. And now, the funny thing and the paradoxical thing is that after the blackouts and during the blackouts, the amount of accidents, starting from fender benders and all the way up to major accidents involving death of people, the amount of accidents dropped. And when you drive the black through the black city, you see that people are really careful and people are really polite. And everybody is trying to respect his neighbors. Uh, so once again, instead of scaring people, instead of putting people on their knees, Mr. Putin had united them once again and made them stronger. But then, of course, it is really unpleasant when you're just wandering around the streets of a city which seems to be completely abandoned. It's dark. You can hardly see anything. Uh, but we have a joke here. A couple of days ago, we went to my mom's place, and on the way back, the blackout started. So we're driving to our place, and my wife turns to me and says, "Was it like that in good old Soviet times?" And I look at her and I say, "Well, frankly speaking, in comparison with good old Soviet times, this is peanuts." No, because usually, uh, the way I remember Soviet Union is I was living in hell. And the worst thing about this hell is that I had no prospects for the future because I could hardly imagine that Soviet Union would end one day, you know? We were
Yeah.
living like rats. So yes,
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of concentration camp, because the territory was large. Even there is a saying in Russia that our country is so large that there is nowhere to run, which is in a way prophetic, by the way. I've noticed, sorry for a detour, but I've heard of millions of people leaving Russia, And the first wave were people who have somehow managed to remain human, I would say. Mostly creative people, like musicians, like the prominent musicians like Alla Pugacheva or the Max Pokrovsky of Noble Swillo. But interestingly, even younger generation, the most successful metal band in Russia moved to Florida, all the way, and they recorded their farewell song 1984 with a very clear reference. Yeah, imagine Russia is so large that there is nowhere to run there. And coming back to the Soviet Union, I clearly remember empty streets because there weren't hardly any cars. So, mm, yeah, that's absolutely, triggering the most worst kinds of memories. So, is it that bad as in the
Yes,
large jail called Soviet Union?
it
What is
is. It
police
is.
doing? What
It
are
is.
the firefighters doing? Do you get any government services?
Yes, we do. Uh, it is. It is pretty bad from the visual point of view. So there are hardly any people on the streets, and the streets seem to be abandoned and dark. But there is a tremendous difference between Soviet Union and what's going on now. First of all, we do understand that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not the afterlife. It's what will happen after our victory. Secondly, we do feel the support of the whole world. For example, Japan, a week ago or so, Japan had presented Odessa with three major generators, and those are big mamas. They're capable of powering up a big hospital, for example, or a couple of them. Um the state energy company, which is, by the way, ran by Mr. Akhmetov, who used to be and who is an extremely rich person and a person who was connected with not only with the criminal world but with Russian world just as well, because during the reign of President Yanukovych, Akhmetov was his right hand actually. And now Akhmetov is one of the most patriotic businessmen of Ukraine, no matter how funny it sounds. And a state energy company is doing its best the way it had never worked before the war. Because if anything happened before the war, you would have to go ballistics to find a manager responsible for your place to call for assistance. You would have to fill in all sorts of papers. You would have to wait. And now when 80% of the system is not only down, it is completely destroyed. This is what people do not understand. They think when the rocket comes, it creates small fire, and then this fire is extinguished and everything is repaired. It's not repaired because it is not repairable. It is completely destroyed. And what these guys do now by powering the city is a miracle, actually, because, well, for the time being, we've uh, we've been introduced to a new schedule which gives us 3 hours of light and 6 hours of darkness, followed by 3 hours of light and 6 hours of darkness. And believe me, whenever light comes, you feel such bright emotions that you haven't felt since you were a child. More to say, every day we get a little bit more, we get a little bit more, we get a little bit more, and we do appreciate it. Of course, yes, there are some places that are completely powerless. Sorry, you know that a couple of days ago Russia attacked Kiev, and after that Kiev was left without power and without heating for a couple of days. And Kiev is not like Odessa; it's not that warm there. It's pretty cold. And Mr. Klitschko, who is the mayor of Kiev, he was even afraid that certain high-rise buildings would suffer the unrepairable damage. But fortunately, everything turned out to be okay. Uh, so the
Just a quick note for listeners around the US or maybe EU. The system of central heating is quite unique to Soviet occupation zone. So, for example, in Riga it's still functioning, but if any visitor from Europe comes, they are surprised. Why isn't there a separate heating for every condominium, for example?
Mhm, mhm.
Instead, there were constructed humongous monster heating stations capable of generating enough heat for megapolis. And what happens if such a station stops in the sub-zero temperatures? The water in the heating system pipes might freeze. The pipes explode under pressure, and here you go, unrepairable damage. Sorry for being boring physics teacher,
No, 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 no,
but
no.
the
It's
people
it's
out
very
there, they don't
important for people
understand.
to understand what may happen. And I'm sad. I'm sorry to say that, but I believe that it will happen before the end of winter because now the weather is quite comfortable. But in few weeks we're about to meet some severe colds, and then high-rise buildings, at least some of them will be abandoned because people will not have a possibility to live inside there without heating unless they will start burning their furniture inside their apartments, which is an option, of course, but not the safest one. Uh,
And also
so
think
I
of plastic pipes. Once they start melting back, it will be flooding.
definitely, of course. So answering your question, the services, the governmental services work. The police works. When I say that police does not control the roads, uh, they do, but they don't have enough policemen to control a city as big as Odessa is. And that is why the roads are uncontrollable and drivers have to control themselves. And it seems that in crisis times, drivers start understanding the basics of driving, which is great. Um, the guys responsible for electricity, like I said, they're true heroes. The fire department, those guys are beyond any heroism
There
because
are also rescue services. So, for example, when the sea mines were washed to the beaches of Odessa, when people got hurt there, the land
Mhm.
mines, the whatever, we have poisonous snakes and insects, I don't know, disease, all of this could
Yeah,
be
that's
handled by firefighters.
yeah, they're like 9/11. They're the emergency department. And the fire extinguishing department is the first department that arrives on the scene after any shelling. They have plenty of work now, unfortunately, in Odessa, in Odessa area and everywhere. You know that during the first months of war, Odessa was a constant target. It is funny because Putin used to say many times, Mr. Putin used to say that he loves Odessa, that Odessa is a truly Russian city, populated and inhabited by truly Russian people. And that is maybe why, loving Odessa so tenderly, he tried to destroy it so many times during the months of war. But for some reason, he failed. Maybe due to the fact that their rockets are as bad as their countries, I don't know. Uh, but I do understand that he will keep on trying. Any Ukrainian will tell you that he will never succeed in terms of breaking Ukraine, psychologically breaking Ukraine. But then there is no possibility we can take care of all the rockets. When they're sending 100 rockets, we can with a bit of luck, we can destroy 50%, 60%, maybe even 70% of those rockets, but the rest will hit and will destroy. And apart from sending some old Soviet rockets that hardly ever find their aims, they also have modern ones that are kind of precise, and when they hit, the damage is usually unrepairable. So I do believe that they will continue. More to say, at this very moment, Odessa region is maybe the most difficult region in terms of blackout situation, because what we have now is, like I said, 3 hours of light against 6 hours of darkness, and we feel ourselves blessed because a week ago we didn't have that much. Um, but with 3 hours of light, we still manage to cook our food. We still manage to feed ourselves, to heat ourselves, and life seems to become almost normal. But I'm sure that maybe this week, maybe next week, and maybe on the New Year's Eve. And for those who don't know, New Year is still the biggest holiday in Ukraine. Yes, we do celebrate Christmas, and starting from now, we celebrate Christmas along with the rest of the civilized world on the 24th of December rather than on the 7th of January. But the biggest and most beloved holiday for all Ukrainians is New Year's Eve. And I'm afraid Putin, who is also aware of the fact that we love New Year, will send us some presents so that we shall appreciate his love and care. And then that creates a biggest question. What will happen if the Ukrainian system collapses? Because I heard you told me in one of our private talks, you told me that in Latvia, many people think that Ukraine will surrender due to this continuous attack on the energy system of Ukraine.
Well, yeah, just don't get me wrong. For example, most people I know, they're not just vocal supporters of Ukraine. They're actually, for example, buying generators, sending this to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
If people don't have time to buy generators, they're donating money or helping refugees in here. But the common sentiment is that we are fighting the genocidal maniac. You know, the country that's eager to freeze to death and exterminate millions, and at the same time, without even much care as the collateral damage, they plan to starve to death 100 million people around the world. So, in such an inhuman adversary situation, what do you think will happen? Not if, but when the system fails, if this is not stopped.
Well, that returns us to the question of St. Petersburg during World War II. And if you remember, I said that these people, they were stronger than we are now because they were not used to those cozy things that we have, to the civilization, but they have survived 2 years of hell. In comparison with what they have passed through, we're still little kids. There is a long way to go, and hardly anyone can predict what a human being is capable of when the hook comes to the crook. For the time being, we are blessed because we have food to eat, we have beds to sleep on, and we have places, we have walls that still surround us. But even if these walls disappear, even if Odessa and Ukraine goes completely black 24/7, even if bigger cities will be abandoned, which may happen, uh, how? We have already survived a month of winter, only 2 months. It's not a big price in comparison with 2 years St. Petersburg was surviving. And we have we have a goal. We do understand that Ukraine is, well, maybe not the most righteous country in the world, We have corruption, we have our flaws, of course. We have inherited plenty of scenes of good old Soviet Union, but in comparison with Russia, we have a different mentality and a different way of understanding our future. And our future is most definitely bright and beautiful. And if it takes suffering to bring this future, okay, we shall suffer. If it takes a couple of months of tolerating cold and misery, okay, we shall tolerate cold and misery. Uh, if water runs out, we have a system of wells, and those wells deliver clean and adequate water, which can be used as potable water and also as water for cooking. If electricity runs out, well, okay, like I said, the high rise buildings will have to be abandoned, but people will move to the villages. They will live in the villages. After all, come on, in the 19th century, nobody had electricity. We have forgot about that completely, but people somehow survived with candles, with 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 uh, with stoves, with fire instead of electricity. So we shall just have to recollect the ways our ancestors used to live. And yes, it seems completely mm, unspeakable in the 21st century to consider coming back to the 19th century. But if we don't do that, and if we agree to any conditions of Russia, it will mean the end of our nation. And of course, I do understand that some people of Ukraine are ready for that. Some people uh, have no desire to call themselves Ukrainians. They say that the 21st century is full of international love, that there are no boundaries and there are no borders, and we're all human beings, and blah blah blah. But it will come to that one way or another in 3,000 years, maybe. But for the time being, there are boundaries and there are borders, and we love our country and we'll fight for it. And that's the major difference between us and Russians. We know what we are fighting for, and we know what we're suffering for. While they come into our country with weapons, they just don't understand what they're doing. They don't have any
Mm,
motivation.
that's quite true because there is some unique special sauce to Ukrainians. Even if you compare our Cossacks to any other pirates in history, Cossacks were unique in the way that instead of taking slaves, they were freeing slaves. They were always following Christian religion, forgiving, blessing, giving, etc. And this might be the reason Ukraine has come to be. But on the other hand, please don't forget that the biggest horrible Second World War, at times, number of Russians in the army reached half of the Soviet army. That was when Ukraine, Belarus were completely occupied by Nazis, and it was like around 1942, 1943, the Stalingrad battle. So Russians are very numerous people, and they're also capable of resistance. Somehow, after 3 years of fighting, they have come, to the desire to fight, and they have somehow liberated Ukraine, and then United forces have eventually attacked their common enemy back then. Some might even argue that basically it was a mistake by the imprisoned occupied nations, that they did not rise against the Soviet occupation, or the ones who did rise, they did it too late. But I'm speaking that Russia is very strong. God forbid it happens. But what if they do go for an ultimate conflict? Tit for tat, eye for an eye, revenge. They're already cooperating with a terrorist country like Iran and North Korea. So, what do you think will happen if Putin understands that he's losing? Do you
Well,
see any alternatives to
my
nuclear elimination of our planet?
my vision of Putin is quite dual. Uh, First of all, I think that he had lost his mind. He is a clinical nutcase. It's not a metaphor, it's a diagnosis. He had lost his mind. Many say that he is suffering from incurable cancer and he is under under medications 24/7, and that also causes steroid rage and things like that. Maybe it's true, I don't know. The way he looks is far from the way he used to look 10 years ago when he had that image of a macho man, riding bears around around Russia. I think that he had lost his mind, and I think that he has a paranoid delusion of being a savior, of bringing his country to not only better, but some esoteric future of a world leader. And a couple of years ago, he said that he was asked, well, his sayings are numerous actually. Once he was asked, where are the borders of Russia? And he answered, oh, there are no borders of Russia. Another time he was asked,
Yeah,
what
as long as the Russian language is heard there. Yeah.
another time he was asked, what will happen with a world without Russia? And he said, oh, who needs a world without Russia? And once, that was way before our war, he said that we're very peaceful people, Russians. But if we are provoked, we shall fight back with all we have. And if it takes destroying the world, okay, we shall destroy the world because we shall go to heaven. And the rest of the world will just perish as dogs. That's a quote from Mr. Putin. So, once again, I think he's crazy. And I think he is not stupid, definitely, because he used to be called the most powerful person in the world by Times Magazine a couple of years ago. You remember that? The most influential people in the man in the world. Since that time, he lost a lot of influence, he lost a lot of power, but he has nuclear teeth. And one day, maybe in a week, maybe in a month, he will understand what everybody understood months ago, that A, this war is lost. It's lost on a battlefield already. Everybody sees it. And it will be lost on a political field. It is lost on a political field as well. It's lost on the moral field. And the only weapon he has is constant shellings of energy system of Ukraine. They're not working as well. This way of fighting the war is not working. So he will understand that the only other alternative is nuclear weaponry. Do I believe he will use it? Yes, I'm absolutely sure he will. Uh, will his people resist him when he gives that command? I don't know. I've lost my faith in any spirit of resistance of Russians. I
Yeah,
think
as I
they're,
mentioned, Ukrainian Cossacks, they became creators of a country, of a culture, of a nation. The Russian Cossacks had a few massive uprisings, but they remained bandits. So,
there is a small mammal called lemming, and these lemmings they have a really strange tendency. Every now and then, a bunch of lemmings, a couple of thousands of them, commit suicide, and psychologists say that certain nations have that lemming syndrome. So I think that Russians at this very moment they're suffering from lemming syndrome. They want to die. They want to disappear. But dying for them means taking as many with them as possible. And that is why, yes, I'm absolutely sure he will try to use nuclear power. I'm 90% sure his people will never stop him. And if he gives that command, all the military guys who are responsible for pushing the buttons will push the buttons. Uh, I, despite many other people who say that, okay, all his nuclear power will not explode, all his rockets are old, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe so. I think some of them will explode and will be enough. Will it be the end of Ukraine? No. Will it be the end of the world? No. Uh, but it is really impossible to predict what happens after he gives such an order. You know that United States of America already warned him and told him that if a single nuke will be dropped on Ukraine, the consequences will be, and one guy said devastative, and another one said catastrophic for Russia. And
But they don't
yeah,
care about losses. As you say, this is mass suicide.
yeah. They don't care about losses. So the way I see it is that Putin will try to nuke Ukraine, which will lead to a huge catastrophe for a territory which is called Russia for the time being. And millions will die because, in a way, he is calling for it. He is begging for it. He is asking the world to destroy him for the last months. He's doing all he can. He is showing all he can so that the world will understand that the only way to reason with this savage beast is to destroy him. But unfortunately, destroying him without destroying half of his country is hardly an option. It sounds completely horrible, but the world will come to it. And so when we're talking about dark times, the dark times are still ahead, fortunately.
Yeah, I'm afraid so, but also mm, I'm praying every day for this horror to be avoided. After all, yes, for example, we know that in his last days, surrounded by enemy, Hitler has ordered to flood the subway of Berlin, where 300,000, mainly women and children, were
Mhm.
hiding from the shelling. So this sort of suicidal behavior is possible for a crazy dictator. However, who knows? Did Hitler actually kill himself, or was he helped? Well, we can be quite confident about Goebbels' family, but I don't remember any, direct evidence that Hitler's death was a suicide. We all know
The
that,
body was burned, so it's hard to
yeah,
say.
exactly why, you know. So there is a hope. Also, of course, if Putin was, you know, as he likes to be called the king, like, for example, the Emperor of Japan, who has witnessed the horrible destruction of two cities by nuclear bombs, and he actually chosen to surrender, thus ending the war. So let's hope for the better outcome. Maybe, you know, Putin will have some momentarily lapse of reason and, do at least one right thing that he's long supposed to do, and that's surrender.
Let's hope for that. We have about 3 minutes left, actually, because in 3 minutes the lights will go down. Um, it's a sad note, actually. I don't want it to end like that. I don't want this war to end in a nuclear blast. And I do hope that even a mad dog like Putin has enough reasons in his head to understand that it will be the complete devastative end for the country that he claims to love that much. I'm talking about Russia, of course, but I think that he doesn't love his country. I think he doesn't love his people. And now it seems to me that he doesn't love himself. It's hatred that moves him. And hatred has no potential, as history tells us. You have mentioned Hitler. Yes, Putin today can be compared with Hitler during his last days. You know that when Hitler was hiding in bunker in Berlin, his officers used to come to him and they brought maps with victories marked on them. Actually, they didn't tell him the truth. What they told him that Soviets are running, that Allies are running, that Berlin is not surrounded, that in few days, and he was absolutely sure that everything was okay. And he was giving orders that were not followed, actually, you know. So I believe that it will come very soon to Putin's officers. Well, actually, they're already feeding him with bullshit. They're telling him that all Ukrainian army is devastated, that all our weaponry is devastated, that our army now consists only of Americans and NATO soldiers, that all Ukrainians love Russia and that they are suffering under a horrible and bloody reign of clown Zelensky, etc. And it seems to me that he believes this bollocks. He believes this bollocks, but he will most definitely share the destiny of Hitler. And yes, you're right. We don't know if Hitler committed suicide, killed his dog and his lover, Eva Braun. Oh, she was his wife because I believe they got married a few days
Yeah, yeah.
before the suicide, or his death was inspired by his officers. But most definitely, same story awaits for Putin. Uh, Tyrants and dictators, they have that. They are desperately naive when it comes to not understanding that even their closest friends hate them and despise them. That is why when Ceausescu and his wife had to face the consequences of what they did with Romania, and standing in front of crowd, standing in front of people that would execute him, Ceausescu did not believe that. He was just mumbling something like, "Oh, come down and go home." He thought it was all a joke. And I really hope same awaits for Putin, because in any other case, not only Ukraine, not only Ukraine will be dark for the next few months. That's a problem with nuclear war. It cannot be local. It's impossible. Well, Slav,
Yeah.
we have to finish this podcast for today at least, and I hope that we'll meet in a week or so, and maybe we'll
Yeah.
discuss something more jolly and more cheerful. But for the time being, it's a pleasure. I'm very glad seeing you, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye
So
bye.
stay strong. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas to you, my friend.